Namaskar. Welcome to this edition of the India Foundation podcast. In this edition of the India Foundation podcast, we have the conversation between Mr. Com Carpentier and Mr. John Petersen. Mr. Com Carpentier is a consultant with India Foundation, and Mr. John Petersen is the founder of the Arlington Institute.
Mr. Petersen, you are a very senior analyst, observer, and researcher of the international situation. You have a long track record of high-level work in various major government and private institutions, including the National Security Council and a number of government entities. And you founded the Arlington Institute back in 1989 to investigate and plan for the future of your country, but of the world on a larger scope. And you have contributed a number of major studies, personally and also with the people that you brought into your work. I will briefly allude to your book from, if I remember right, 1989, The Diffusion of Power, an era of realignment. Sorry, that's and right. You also wrote a 2015 reflection on the future. So, the last few weeks have been dominated in terms of the international situation by what has happened in Afghanistan. I would like to ask you to give your input on why you think this withdrawal took place in the way it did and what it signals, what it signifies for both the United States and the world.
Yeah, well, it's nice to be with you. First of all, you can't ever look at these kinds of international things without looking at local politics. And in some way, and it's not clear, at least to me, the withdrawal from Afghanistan is clearly impacted and driven by some external kind of reason that is not obvious. I know enough about the military to know if they had been told to extract themselves in an organized kind of way, they know how to do that. And they know how to do that very, very well. And the fact that this was such an abrupt thing suggests that there was some other issues, there were other forces in play, and I don't know what they were. And it wasn't just short-term politics because there was nothing pressing on Joe Biden that needed him to do that, unless they were trying to mask some other event that it was about to become public, which is often the case in things like this. But I really don't know why they did it. I mean, it's the beginning of this administration in this country is becoming very frayed in terms of its direction and its politics and its it's just sense of itself, and this is the first of what I'm convinced are a series of events that are going to increasingly rend the fabric of who we all are.
Yes, I watched one of your podcasts in which you actually predict a breakdown of the United States, or rather its breakup into more than 2 or 3 countries. Do you see that happening possibly in the very few coming years?
Well, that is derived from predictions that come from Martin Armstrong, who's a very famous economist who developed 40 years ago some technology, a computer program that he wrote that's based upon the cyclical nature of how things work on this planet. It's the only computer program of its kind, and what it essentially says that everything in our lives works on this kind of cyclical nature. It's maybe, if you will, a pendulum-like, and it swings back and forth and back and forth. It oscillates, and everything oscillates at different kind of frequencies. And what Martin Armstrong figured out was what the unique kind of oscillatory kind of characteristics were of different aspects of life. So he's got 70 plus modules of different things. It has to do with the weather. It has to do with um, uh, it has to do with economy and finance and politics and on and on and on. Lots of different things. And the thing that's important about it is that it's never been wrong. And in terms of its predictions, in terms of the financial situations in economy and politics and so on, he is always been right. And he's been right, easily out at least 6 months, and in many cases, many years, decades early, in being able to anticipate the confluence of these different kind of events. And what his computer's been telling him for a long time is that between 2027 and 2025 and 2027, there will be a global civil war. And a global civil war is something that anyone listening to this will not understand what that means, because most civil wars are national civil wars, and a global civil war, you don't know what that quite means. But it's starting to become clear, and it's becoming clear, it seems to me, that there is a broad-based uprising or growing awareness by people in government, in populations across the planet, that they have been taken advantage of. They've been lied to by their governments in big time. And whether it has to do with the COVID thing, or whether it has to do with any number of other geopolitical stuff, it's what you're finding, that they have been that they're losing confidence in their government. And there's also the separatist movement that is pretty broadly based and is showing up all over the place. And the combination of these things suggests that there's going to be a broad-based kind of uprising in 3 or 4 years that kind of pits the populace against their governments, because the governments seem to be in league in this whole thing. And what comes out of that, what Martin Armstrong says, is by 2032, there is no United States. There is a series of 5 or 6 different countries in North America, probably subsumes parts of Mexico and Canada. And there is no European Union. And one would presume that same kind of dynamic kind of extends across other places in the world. And so that's where that all comes from. And if you put that scenario in the back of your mind, and you look at this across the world and about what's happening, you can certainly see the events, certainly in the United States, the internal political events and other things, starting this fragmentation and this disillusionment of government and what they're doing, and kind of the way that they're leading us down the path into the future. And so that's what that's about.
Thank you. We will pursue that line of reasoning, but to go back to Afghanistan, I was very interested in the analysis of some very, I would say, experienced observers of Afghanistan, who feel that there was a deliberate policy by the United States to deliver to the Taliban some of their most modern weaponry, which they are now equipped with. And many have wondered whether this was a deliberate design to provide for the Taliban a base from which they could possibly create trouble for neighboring countries for a broader geopolitical goal, which might simply be that, many governments want to use the threat of terrorism to enforce regulations and controls, such as we are seeing now in most parts of the world. What is your view on that?
Anything is possible. And I don't mean that as a trite kind of throwaway. What I've learned, now, first of all, I've never worked with the intelligence communities. I've worked with the Department of Defense. I've certainly known a lot of people that were in the intelligence business and have probably a better than average understanding of perhaps about how they operate. I've never done any classified work. I've never done so. But that said, What I've come to understand is that there is a great deal of things that are going on under the table that nobody understands. And that all of the information that's given to it took me about 2 days in the White House to figure out that what I was watching and reading in the New York Times in particular, I remember, I looked at it, the headlines, and I said, this is not true. I was in the meeting. I know what happened. And what you find out is that everything is being spun, right? Everything is being manipulated in order to get certain kind of political, geopolitical, financial, economic, whatever advantages that the government is trying to do. And then that kind of goes up, raises up to another level, and you start to say, so why is the government doing what they're doing? And then you got to say, well, what is the commercial or the banking community or whoever else is all involved in all of this? What are the ultimate objectives here? And what I think is that we're in the middle of the biggest change in the history of the planet. And so what you're starting to see is the disintegration of the existing systems and the relationships and, you know, the underlying principles and all the kind of things that have supported us over the past decades. And what that is going to do is effectively implode, and that provides kind of the vacuum for the emergence of a new world. And so that's kind of what we're seeing here. And so I have no idea what's going on in Afghanistan and how they're trying to set this thing up, or what they're trying to do, or who's got an under the table deal for how many billions of dollars. You know, I don't know. They're just, it's crazy when you really get to know some of what's going on, because it's nothing at all like in general what the American people think, because the American people in the world, for that matter, is to get their information from the news, from the press, and the press is controlled by the intelligence agencies. And so, you know, there you go.
Yes, I remember listening to you saying that the Mockingbird program had succeeded in essentially making the press say whatever the powers that be wanted to say. You know, control over the information, even if you can call it information. In fact, regarding the economy, as part of the larger picture of what's happening, there are increasing warnings that the economy is in for a very rough patch, and that we might see another mega crisis such as we witnessed in 2007-8, but perhaps even bigger. From your standpoint, where do you think the economy is going, given that there is unprecedented printing of fiat money, both in the US and in the European Union, but also in China? Where do you think that's taking us?
Well, you know, kind of tagging on to my last comment, what you're seeing is the disintegration of the old system. And the old components of the legacy systems are unsupportable. They're structurally unsustainable. And what that means is that they've driven this thing off to the edge of this cliff, you know, thrown more money at it, and you know, they're clearly at a place where the United States is never going to pay off their debts, and you know, everything is. I mean, we're running up at the 1st of October to the inability of the United States government to operate just from a financial point of view. And usually that they extend the debt limits, and now there's all kinds of reasons to believe that it's impossible for them to extend the debt limits, and that there is an impending kind of crisis that is coming downstream. There are multiple sources that are saying that sometime in the next about 4 to 5 weeks, there is going to be a huge kind of disruption, an extraordinary kind of disruption that is in this country, at least, that obviously would reverberate, whatever it was, would reverberate throughout the world. And what I know is that that the as I say, the present system cannot continue, that it is unsustainable. And so there are multiple kind of plans in the works, and sometimes they're just discounted. People say that they're going to reset the financial system, that they've already printed up some of the new currency, that they're going to kind of generate parity across all of the currencies across the planet. There's all kinds of things like that, and all of it suggests that there is going to be some kind of significant kind of disruption. And it's really hard at one level to know what's true here, because like I said, everybody's trying to spin this thing, and everybody's trying to use it for their own advantage. And so truth is very hard to kind of distill. And but it certainly looks like that there is something very large and very disruptive, and it's coupled, by the way, to the exposure of a lot of secrets, things that have been secret. There's indications that suggest that there may be tied to the disclosure of large-scale kind of pedophilia things that have been going on in this country, if not around the world, and that it will implicate very high-level people in our government. It's just combinations of things that are all coming together, and it's not at all clear that it's unlikely that it would just kind of be economic, because there's all these contributing factors, because it's a system. But certainly there is disruption on the horizon and on the near horizon, and it's the best indications that I have are that it's of epic size. It's very large.
We are talking about October, practically next month. Yeah. When you said 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah, third, fourth week in October.
Well, it will be good to watch and see. Maybe not good to watch, but it will be interesting to see if it happens as you feel it may, and as much as many people do.
It will be very obvious if it happens the way it seems to be lining up. Yeah, there will be no question what's going on.
In your book, Wildcards and Other Big Surprises, Future Surprises, you in fact do state what some of those wildcards are. And of course, as wildcards are, you are never sure that they will actually fall. But in your view, what are the major ones that are imminent, as it were?
Well, wildcards, and I kind of invented that term to be used this way, are big surprises that are coming on stream, and they're so big, or they're coming so fast that there's nothing that you can effectively do for them. You can't position yourself very well for them. And it was interesting because that book came out of an attempt but it's a longer story. Back in the 80s, I was doing some work, and you mentioned a study that I did that Colin Powell and some other people in the senior levels in our government used to look at the strategic kind of direction of where the world was going. And so it became clear to me back in the middle 80s that there was this convergence coming downstream, and that there was some thing up in the front up here at some point that was going to have a giant change and reorganization of life on this planet. And so I started wondering, well, what was it that could do that? And was there any way that you could, is there any kind of events? What kind of events could not only precipitate that kind of change in general, but more specifically generate that kind of change, would be the catalytic events for that kind of change in a benign kind of way, in a kind of a friendly kind of way. Because it's real easy to come up with all kinds of disasters that could blow up and stop it. And so I started with about 150 different of these wildcards, these big events that could come and change the world in a hurry. And I still distilled it down to about 85, I think it was. And of that 85, there were only 2 that were kind of benign. And one of them was ET arrives, extraterrestrials arrive, and the other one is the return of the Messiah. And for my money, maybe that's the same thing. But in any case, there was this whole possibility of the exposure and the awareness of life off of the planet. Well, I think that that is one of the big wild cards that's clearly in the works. The United States government, at least at certain levels, has decided to disclose the activities and research and findings that they've had in this area for a long time in very secretive, very black programs. And what's that's done is just opened up the area for research in lots of ways and legitimized the whole subject. And so that's one of the places where this is going to happen. There's going to be breakthroughs. There already are breakthroughs in energy production that are going to in the works. And, you know, I know of the projects, some of the projects that could make fossil fuels obsolete. And you just got to work your way around the oil companies or the other big vested interests who are trying to keep this thing going in the same direction. As I said, there are all these geopolitical things that are coming downstream, the separatist movements, as well as you know, the implosion of the existing systems. The American political system is a mess. You know, I'm convinced that the last election was stolen in a very systematic way. I mean, it's just the whole thing is corrupted, many different levels. None of that is sustainable, and so what you're going to get is a whole series of these kind of exposures of some of this kind of stuff, which in the aggregate are going to kind of do a chain of series of disruptive exposures and events that will precipitate the implosion of the existing system. And as I said, the emergence of a new one.
Yes, we have heard these forecasts in the last several years. So far, I must say, the establishments worldwide have managed to keep things pretty much under wrap. In other words, there hasn't been an earth-shattering, irrefutable change in the perspective that we have of our reality and of our future. But as you say, maybe this time of relative embargo on truth is coming to an end. I mean, that's the impression.
Well, you make an interesting point, and that's kind of the shortcoming in this business of being in a futurist, as I am, and that is the whole timing on things, because you can see some of this stuff coming, and you see kind of the inevitability of it, but for however you build your opinions, whether it's through scenario planning or, you know, use outside sources and some of the things like I've talked about, you see it coming, but there is a huge kind of latency in the system, because there's this hanging on of the old order that is trying to maintain control and consistency, because I mean, it's existential for them. I mean, they make their whole livelihood, their living is all based upon this sustaining the present kind of trajectory. And so so there is an issue of timing, and I would agree with you, but like I say, there are multiple sources that are all pointing to this being the culmination of all of these kind of changes.
When you refer to energy, there is a lot to be found in some of your writings and podcasts, because you specifically refer, among others, to the new source of energy, which would be decentralized, which means that everybody could potentially, in short order, control his own or her own supply of energy at family level or at small community level or even at individual level, which would, of course, put an end to all the major corporations which control energy production and distribution. Now, that clearly, literally unravels the current system. which
Right.
largely relies on the control of energy sources and of energy supply networks. How do you think that is possible? It seems to me that the
Yeah.
whole social structure would have to be overthrown in order for this
Yeah.
to prevail.
Yeah, you're on the right track. It's a system, and it's a lot of big pieces all connected to each other. And so you can't look at it individually. You can't just look at the energy technology shows up and it changes, because it doesn't. Nothing happens by itself. You've got economic, you've got social, you've got political, you've got all of these other underpin that things that are all interconnected into the same system. And so for something like that to happen, there needs to be fundamental kind of change and shift that's going on in other areas as well. So you could have the larger context. It could be the environmental. There could be some environmental catastrophe. There could be a blast of energy out of the sun, or there could, some, cosmic thing that could happen. There could be, somebody gets really scared about, maybe there was I'm just making this stuff up, but maybe there was maybe we had a small scale nuclear war and everybody got scared, and then they said, no, but don't do this. Maybe there was a huge accident that
Black Swan.
No, there's all these kinds of things. Nothing happens by itself. And so what you have to do, and by the way, it's not out of the question that the big oil companies could look downstream and see this whole thing coming and become part of the solution, and start to get into a different business and start to buy up some of these technologies and implement them and distribute them rather than hide them as they've done in the past. And so it's not simple. It's a complicated kind of process, but you can see the emergence of the technologies, and the only question is, how does the rest of the system configure itself so that you get kind of a wedge in there for the emergence of these kinds of things.
You, I believe, were instrumental in the creation of the Technology Horizon Foundation. In fact, I believe it was your brainchild. And you also established the digital analysis, essentially you call it DIANE, right? DIANE, which is an acronym. So it's a digital analysis environment. And I know that Singapore adopted it in 2001, if I remember right, for its own mapping of the future, for its essentially future development. With regard to India, the India Foundation is hosting this podcast. Would you have any particular suggestion or recommendation in the sense that India could perhaps use that strategy as well?
Sure. Well, the things that you mentioned were precursors to the kind of the major project, which is called Risk Assessment Horizon Scanning. The defense minister of Singapore came to me here in Washington one day when he was in town and called me up into his hotel suite and said, we got surprised by SARS, and we don't ever want to get surprised again. Can you build us a surprise anticipation capability? And I told him, yeah, I thought I could. And so I came up with the concept of this kind of distributed network about how you could tie all of the agencies of the government of Singapore together to where they were looking out systematically out across the horizon, primarily on the internet. Looking at the areas that were important to them, because of the different agencies had different importance, and specifically looking for scenarios and events, the precursors, the early indicators of the events that might happen that would kind of eat their lunch. That would be a giant surprise. That would be very disastrous to them. Now, interestingly enough, by the way, it turns out that the big opportunities, this is structurally the same as looking for big opportunities. And you can, so that you can look either at the positive side or the kind of the negative side, if you will. And so we built that, and it still exists, I guess. I haven't been in touch with them for a long time. But this is really important capability, however you develop it. It's really quite important because we're into a period of time of exponential change. And what that means is amazing kind of uncertainty. Because by definition, you're moving into a new space that is nothing like the past. All of our experience and all of our knowledge comes from the past. All of our concepts about how things work, our solutions, most of the time come from previous kind of experiences. And so as you as you go into this kind of space, this unusual space, this unprecedented space, you need some kind of mechanism for looking out on the horizon and being able to see things coming downstream. Because if you don't see them coming downstream, they are by definition surprise, and they happen. They're surprises, and surprises by definition mean that you're not ready. You don't have, and what I would suggest to you are there are big surprises. They're stacked one right behind the other. And we've alluded to some of these in the past. And so that it's really quite important to have some kind of a mechanism, forward thinking of, forecasting, of scanning, whatever you might call the thing, to look forward. And so whether it's India or any other kind of place, there are a lot of smart people in India. I've spent a good bit of time and a lot of friends in India, and you just really need to be able to see some of this stuff coming in, because it is also by definition strange. It's unusual. Because there are no precedents for it. And so you need a systematic way to do that. And so the technology is available. I'm given to believe that there are some classified kind of capabilities that are now, that some places in the U.S. government. And I guess at one time I had somebody that had won from Europe, maybe it was the Germans, I can't even remember. Maybe it was even the Swiss that that asked me about this. But clearly that kind of capability is very, very important and central to these times.
Yes, well, I must say that talking about India and other countries, there is one country which we cannot help talking about before we end this talk, which is China. What is your view of China, and how do you think China is prepared for this future that you have evoked? Do you think, as many believe, that the era of Chinese supremacy has come, or do you think China too will suffer, like other countries, from the shocks that we expect and that are already, in fact, affecting us?
Yeah, I think everybody's going to suffer from the shocks. I don't think this is going to be a global. This is the biggest change in the history of the planet, in recorded history at least, and so it's going to be planet-wide. And so China, being as large and uncertain as it is going to participate in that fully. China, I was once, it's just a number of years ago, but I was once over in Shanghai at a conference that I was speaking at, and a member of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, I guess is what they called it, and gave a talk. And he said the premier of China wakes up in the morning and he's got three things on his mind. And these three things are color everything he talks about. One of them is economics. He talks about circular economics. What China's trying to do is get to the place where they essentially are sustained primarily by their own economy and not dependent upon external countries like the United States. Right now, there's a huge, obviously, dependency with China on the U.S. market, and what they're trying very hard to do is to get an internal one. The other one of the other kind of issues was the environment, that they have huge kind of problems associated with sandstorms and other kinds of things coming from off of the Gobi Desert and other places, because they've taken down all of the trees and such. And the whole environmental issue is a very significant and fundamental one for them. I mean, it's kind of by extension, you know, you can look at the Three Gorges Dam and the huge kind of rains that they've had, and the possibilities that that thing could break loose, and you know, that whole business, and it could tear out the kind of the breadbasket of China, as if it got loose, to say nothing about all the people, but also the food. And
industrial plants also, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's huge kind of stuff. And so he said that he's got the circular economy, and he said that they've got to have. Let me see. I'm trying to.
You said circular economy, environment, and there was a third thing.
Yeah, and the third thing was, I think. Oh yeah, it was internal stability. That there. I remember, and this has been easily 12, 15 years ago, that the interior minister of China stood up one time and said, 2 years ago we had, if I remember right, it was like 40,000 internal riots in China. And last year we had 60,000 internal riots. And so there's huge kinds of problems in terms inside of the country related to stability, as this giant organism kind of morphs itself into some new kind of space. Now that only gets, in a sense, I mean, in some senses it's gotten better because they raised the standard of living and so on, but trying to manage a group that large and as variegated as that is over this period of time of high rates of change and uncertainty is going to be very, very hard. So it's not clear. My point is, it's not clear that there's clear sailing for China. Certainly, they're trying to establish themselves as a principal kind of force on the planet, but I would argue that that is conventional extrapolatory thinking. They are looking at a straight vector and saying the world will continue along this track, and if we do these kinds of things, we will dominate that space. This is a space that is, like I suggested, is full of wild cards and big changes and disruptions and other kind of things that are not on that kind of straight line kind of track. And there are waves of energy coming out of the sun that are affecting the earth and affecting human beings and the evolution of our species. And, it's just crazy and wild things that are not conventional kind of analysis. And so, certainly China's going to play, Russia's going to play. Russia is, for my money, a lot more stable than probably, a lot of the other major players on the planet. But in any case, it is full of uncertainty, and it's hard to, and it's only possible in conventional kind of analysis to say that China is going to dominate the world in the future, because it's very uncertain, and I don't know.
Well, and that will be my last question. But as you know, in the last few days, we have heard about the new, it's not a new alliance, but it is a sort of activated alliance between the United States, Britain, and Australia, three Anglo-Saxon powers. And clearly, this pact that has recently been reinforced is directed at China. And India, in a way, is being invited to join it because there are concerns about China in all four countries. Now, how do you see that going? Do you think that will have any impact, or is it just a way of essentially having leverage over China? Or is there a real intent to go to war?
Oh, it's just large-scale geopolitics, and there's always this kind of working a way to try to get alliances and relationships. I mean, when I worked with Singapore, it was really interesting because they were in this constant effort to try to maintain an equal relationship between the United States and China because they saw themselves as being so small and vulnerable, and so they had to keep always make sure that that those two kind of things worked. And then they started moving to work with build similar kind of relationships with India because they saw India as being a major kind of player. And so there are all of this kind of standard geopolitical kind of jockeying around that is going on. And so sure, there are these conventional kind of approaches that, coming out of the Harvard, school of governments or whatever it is that about how you're supposed to do this. But all I'm telling you is that there are wild cards. There's changes, there's disruptions in this system. This is a time of the biggest change in history. This is the emergence of a new human in a whole new world. And these kind of geopolitical things are little aberrations on top of a very large curve that is going in quite a different kind of direction. And if you get yourself focused on the small little things, you're going to miss the big picture. And the big picture is the most important thing that's ever happened, and it's what we all need to be focused on.
By the way, India is likewise, working hard to keep a balance between China and the United States, so as not to get unilaterally brought into one camp against another.
Sure.
This was a very apt conclusion to this fascinating conversation. I hope that we will have the opportunity to continue this question and answer session in the future. And so thanks again to the India Foundation for hosting this podcast, and greetings to all.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the India Foundation podcast. Do like, share, and subscribe the India Foundation channel.